Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Chodesh Tov. I'm going to warn you right from the get-go here. I'm about to say something iconoclastic. That's your warning. So here's the thesis statement. Don't worry. We'll unpack it, I promise. And I also promise that if you find me at lunch and you can tell me how wrong or how right I am. Deal? Great. Okay. Thesis statement. One of the biggest missteps in Jewish history was the transformation of synagogues into houses of prayer. That's the thesis statement. And I realize that I am saying those words in one of the most iconic conservative synagogues in the world. I understand that paradox. But hear me out for a second. So I'm going to call on my Hebrew speakers right now. Can my Hebrew speakers out there tell me what the Hebrew word is for synagogue? Synagogue, of course, is a Greek word. Synagoga. What is the Hebrew word, Emma? Beit HaKnesset. Okay, now what is a Beit HaKnesset? What does that translate to? A house of gathering. A house of gathering. And when synagogues were created during the Roman occupation of Eretz Israel, they were exactly what their name denotes. They were houses of gathering, places for Jews to come together socially. The original synagogues were not places of tefillah. They were not places of worship. They were JCCs. They were Jewish community centers. We prayed back then at the Beit HaMikdash, at the temple. And prayer, of course, looked very different because it was not about words. Emma read this for us earlier for our Maftir reading for Rosh Chodesh. It wasn't about words, not about an inner journey to find communion with Hashem, but rather a role-based system of korbanot, of offering different sacrifices, animal sacrifices, wheat sacrifices, wine sacrifices, with a kavanah, with an intention in mind when you offered your sacrifice. But that original intentionality was based on Torah, on text, on tradition that made perfect sense. Korbanot, sacrifices, offerings, were made to God so that we could draw close to God and so that God could reward us for that closeness. And how did God reward us? Well, if you do me a favor and pick up your Siddur, and you turn to page 112 in your Siddur, and you read the second paragraph of the Shema, beginning with the Vahaya, that if you will earnestly heed the mitzvot I give you this day to love Adonai your God and to serve God with all your heart and all your soul, then I will favor your land with rain at the proper season, in autumn and in spring, and you will have an ample harvest of grain, wine, and oil. I will assure abundance in the fields for your cattle. You will eat to contentment. That is the reward. Drawing close to God gave us the reward of rain. Our prayer, our devotion, our closeness brought about harmony with the natural world around us. We did God's will so that we could survive, so that we could merit the rains, merit our crops, merit the food on our tables and on our plates. And for that reason, prayer was an outdoor act because it had everything to do with outside, being outdoors. To pray indoors, to offer sacrifices that would rise up to a ceiling of human construction rather than the open air of creation and God's dwelling in the world would be as sensical as putting a screen door on a submarine. But that's exactly what we did. We put a screen door on a submarine. Now, to be fair, Judaism changed because it had to. It had to. Because the temple was destroyed. And if the temple was destroyed, well then korbanot, sacrifices, and the entire priestly cult was no longer possible. It couldn't be maintained. And so the rabbis did something incredibly chutzpahdik. And instead of saying, well, I guess Judaism is over, they decided to pivot. And they pivoted hard. They did a really hard pivot. They took avodat ha-korbanot, they took the service of the sacrifices, and they turned it into avodat halev, the service of the heart. They took blood and fire and turned it into whispers and recitations. They took the physical and turned it into the mystical. And yes, they took nature and packed it up into buildings and retellings. So here are some examples. They took Sukkot, and rather than making it the Simchat Beit HaShoeva that it was in the temple, the traditional fall harvest holiday, and the celebration of the water festival, which the Gemara tells us that if you could see only one time the Simchat Beit HaShoeva in their lifetime, you would see the epitome, you would see the essence of joy and celebration. And they made it into a recreation of our ancestors in the wilderness. They took Shavuot, which we'll be celebrating in just a few weeks, and rather than keeping it as the culmination of the time from the barley harvest to the wheat harvest, turned it into Zman Matan Toratenu, the anniversary of our receiving of the Torah. They took Orla, the mitzvah of waiting 3 years before consuming a tree's fruit, and turned 3 into the age of a boy's upshearing, his first haircut, and his entrance into Cheder, his first learning of Torah. They pivoted hard. And thank God they did. Because if they hadn't, we might not be here today. In fact, I think it's safe to say we probably wouldn't be here today. But at the same time, that dramatic and very necessary pivot, in my opinion, and this is where you can tell me if I'm wrong, I'm open to it, I promise, went too far. It threw the baby out with the bathwater. It kept us alive. It allowed us to be Jewish anywhere we ended up. Spain, Portugal, Russia, and Poland, Dexter Linwood. But it also took away some of the magic that was central to our tradition's origins. Judaism without an awareness, without an appreciation or a knowledge of nature is not Judaism. It's industrialism with some monotheistic theology. It's study without application. It's building a bicycle and then leaving it in the garage. Just as a word of precaution, if you happen to think that I'm going to tie this up with a beautiful bow and give us all a correct answer for how we move forward with an integration of what was and what is, I'm not. Those who joined me for Timely Torah a couple of weeks ago, Mark and Emma, I see you nodding your head at me, you know that I'm wrestling with this and what it means for the future of our tradition. But I think we need to start having the conversation. And I can think of no time like the present, because it is Shabbat Rosh Chodesh. It is a celebration of Shabbat, but it is also a celebration of the new moon, because it is the period of the Omer, the counting from the barley harvest to the wheat harvest, because it is spring in Michigan. Today, maybe not. I don't know, some days it feels like it, some days it doesn't. But regardless of if it's cold or if it's warm, the tulips and the daffodils are in bloom. Our magnolia tree in front of our house has burst into this incredible explosion of pinks and purples. And the symphony of God's creation is singing with rebirth and renewal. And because today, as we mark Earth Day, we are also painfully aware of what our distance from nature has led to. Dramatic and precipitous climate change. Deforestation and urban development that has wiped out species of plants, animals, and minerals. Relying on chemicals and poisons to feed our growing population. And wastefulness. So much wastefulness. we need to celebrate where we are Jewishly. We've come so far, and we've turned our tradition into something meaningful and powerful while simultaneously being portable. But we also need to heed the words of the Siddur when we put the Torah back in the Aron HaKodesh, Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem, renew us like in the days of old. We need to remember where we came from. Not just our ancestral homeland, we need to remember that, but we need to remember that we are B'nai Adam, that we are children of Adam, of Adam. And the word Adam in Hebrew comes from Adamah. Adam comes from Adamah. We come from the earth. And to the earth we return. And so while I will always be grateful and so in love with this tradition that allows us to be here today, that allows us to gather in this beautiful, warm, dry sanctuary, I think I'm going to go ahead and keep wrestling. Because there is still a part of me that says, this isn't where we're supposed to pray. That we're not supposed to pray for dew, or geshem, or tal, inside. That it seems somewhat disingenuous to thank God for the rain and for our food, and then to go put chemically manufactured non-dairy coffee creamer in my coffee at lunch while sitting in a social hall looking out the window at the grass and the trees. I think there's a piece that we're missing. But I think that piece wants us to find it. And I think deep within our bones, deep within our DNA, there is a primal call that wants us to find it too. So we can remember. So we can be renewed like in the days of old. So we can follow the moon through her cycles, so that when we say Chodesh Tov, we don't mean happy new month. We mean happy time of renewal, happy time of beginning again, happy time of opportunity, of potential, of growth. Because the earth is praying, it's singing, and it's waiting for us to join in the song. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Chodesh Tov. Just a quick disclaimer that as part of this, the social action team will soon be embarking on some environmental projects showing some love to the city of Detroit. So please stay tuned for that information coming soon. I'll ask you